made it here, you're clearly tracking that we have adjusted our op tempo a little bit, both the 20X working group and the Rev5 working group. Once again, we are going to be the first Wednesday of the month at 1 o'clock, and they are going to be, or the 20X one will be the third Wednesday of each month at the same time as well. It should not have changed the invite. Clearly, you've made it here, so it's not an issue for you. We are recording. We jumped the gun a little bit, but if you don't have any desire to visibly be on screen, please face mute yourself now, and you won't have anything to worry about. This is where I read the glorious disclaimer. Don't worry, I feel like every few months it gets a little bit shorter. So let me kick that off, right? I am communicating to you today in my official capacity on behalf of the FedRAMP program office at the General Services Administration. We hold these meetings to enhance transparency between industry and FedRAMP so that we can open a dialogue and share new developments. Nothing that we share constitutes business advice, and any reference in this conversation to any specific commercial product or products or the use of any corporation name is for the information and convenience of the public, does not constitute endorsement or recommendation or favoring by GSA. All right, that being said, we've got a few updates today. I know the last few months we've been shooting out a lot of RFCs, and we've calmed down as we've started to kind of migrate into some of the beta phases for those. But we'll give you a little bit of update of where we are on the significant change notification closed beta. We'll talk about RFC 12. People talk for a minute on RFC 12 about the continuous vulnerability management standard that came out late July. And is open for, I want to say 2 more weeks, so it's on the slide, and then I'll talk about how we'll roll that into another beta, turning into kind of full implementation down the road. And last but not least, we have the members from the FedRAMP Technical Advisory Group on to have an open conversation. And I think at that point in time, we'll also open the chat for questions. So without further ado, as you know, the significant change notification closed beta kicked off July 7th. We had a pretty good pretty good showing so far. We talked a little bit last time about kind of how we're going to roll out all of these standards. We are going to do a kind of crawl, walk, run methodology. We will start with a closed beta based on kind of targeted commercial service or cloud service providers, a mix of both those from the commercial world and a few of the government ones here resident in GSA. We'll work those generally for 2 to 3 months, depending on the standard itself. We'll migrate then to an open beta, right? Those CSPs that want to migrate a little bit early and that have concurrence from their supported agencies or the supporting agencies. And then we'll kind of move on to wide release once we get it right. Really, a lot of the key outcomes from the betas, and these will probably look different or probably look the same across all of the standards that we work through, right? It's really to identify any of the implementation barriers prior to going to full implementation. We talked a little bit about the 3-tiered approach to standards, right? Every standard will have, the standard at a high level, which will be super high level. It'll be followed by technical assistance, which will give kind of guidelines to implementations. And it will be followed by a document that includes best practices, right? And as we start to establish those best practices, we'll populate those documents as well. So yeah, outside of that, TA refinement, a list of best practices, and really this is our first beta, so really trying to get a set of repeatable processes so that each of these betas kind of flow the same regardless who's running them. All right, so for the closed beta, we have 7 cloud service providers. It's a mix of both commercial entities and government cloud service providers, just to kind of make sure we're hitting all the notches. Between those CSPs, we have 35 significant changes. Almost all of them are within the closed beta window. Some of those roll over into the open beta window as well. We are tracking all of those internally. We haven't run into too many issues so far, right? Most of the CSPs have the easiest way to kind of get us involved and allow us to kind of watch what the significant change in process and kind of follow through is to actually sit in the continuous monitoring, the collaborative continuous monitoring meetings. That seems to be the easiest way to kind of integrate the FedRAMP team and the significant change process into your already ongoing meetings without causing more meetings for federal entities or yourself. Some of the really identified areas for action or refinement within the technical assistance or the best processes, right? Some of the questions we have along is if we are going to add a new service as part of the significant change notification process, at what point in time are we allowed to add it to the marketplace, right? And I think the conversation we're having is really around those changes that are transformative in nature, and that do require some 3PAO action, right? If you're familiar with the standard, you know that, hey, post-implementation, you have so many days before 3PAO has to start an assessment for those items that need some sort of manual assessing. Are you able to, put that new service in the marketplace with an asterisk saying, hey, it is a new service that's authorized, it is undergoing 3PAO evaluation. I think that's currently where the process we are leaning towards, but as we do a few more reps and sets, we'll kind of smooth it out. And lastly, right, I think we're really migrating from a more, I don't know how to say this politically correct, right? A more government-controlled significant change process to a cloud-managed significant change process, right? And in one or two instances, right, that there's kind of the is this transformative? Is this adaptive? And if we disagree, right, who's got the say, right? And I think that's the beauty behind the CIA that comes in, right? Security impact assessment, right? Is that using that and doing that correctly will actually help drive to the identification of whether it is truly adaptive or whether it's truly transformative. And I don't think we spell that out well in the technical assistance. It's just something we need to update kind of as we go through. But other than that, everything seems to be going smooth as possible for a government beta. And now I will pass it over to Pete. Oh, no, I lied. I forgot about this slide. We are moving into open beta next month. We have got a lot of emails, so I apologize if I have not responded to emails. There are two dude and dudettes behind the email, and so if you do have interest next month, please email rev5@gsa.gov. Please include the following 7 components if you do want to go into the open beta, right? For cloud service providers, please make sure you've talked to your agencies as part of your collaborative Kanban process and they are on board. If they are not on board, please ensure that you do have opt-in functionality with the significant changes you are planning on doing so that those agencies that don't want to kind of work through it can have the option to opt out of it. And now I think I'm actually passing it over to Pete.
Let's take a couple minutes here to answer some of the questions in the chat since we're doing these hot. Was it surprising to see 15 transformative changes? I don't think that was particularly surprising because folks had big changes that they want to make, and cloud service providers do big changes, and we got some big cloud service providers in the pilot. So maybe also, Paul, you think people kind of erring on the side of caution there to begin with too, sort of defaulting towards transformative?
Yeah, there's really kind of two scenarios, right? Like one, like you've been waiting for this, right? And like this is the thing that has pushed you and your agency's on board, right? And everyone's for it because it brings greater functionality faster, and it's just sped up something that you've had planned for what was previously probably years to now being able to condense that in a few months. So I think that's a lot of the transformative pieces that we get, but there's definitely I think everyone's initial ones, or almost everyone's initial ones, are adaptive to just kind of feel out the process and like, hey, let me get a quick win out there and just see where our internal processes kind of break down, not internal to us, but internal like on the CSP wise, that we need to adjust before we drop not a bigger bomb, before we start with a bigger transformation.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to like recommended formats, et cetera, like that's the whole point of the closed beta is to kind of start to dial those in before we publish some ideas for the closed beta. But again, like throughout all of this, the purpose of these processes are to test and evaluate rather than for FedRAMP in advance to say, this is the format, this is what we expect people to do. So it'll be interesting to follow along and see what kind of stuff comes out of it. And then I got one other quick question here, which is about processes to CSPs that are in process. It doesn't matter if you're in process or if you're authorized, that the application is the same. It's based on what the rules, how the rule says it applies. Right now it applies only to to closed beta participants, and then eventually it will move to open beta. And then at some point in the future, if you read our discussion on balance improvement releases, which we'll talk about a bit with RFC 12, it takes a while to get to the point where this applies to everyone. So You have to hang on and participate in the betas if you want to see this early or wait for a good solution in place. So we're going to jump quick to RFC 12 and talk about this. There's a similar overlap here to the significant change notification process, which is why I wanted to make sure that folks in the Rev5 working group are paying attention, know what's going on. We're going to be spending a bit of time talking about it in more detail with the tag in a moment. But RFC 12 effectively replaces the previous continuous reporting RFC, as well as the intent is for it to eventually replace all of the continuous monitoring, vulnerability scanning, all of those requirements and guidelines that you all follow right now will be rolled into this new continuous vulnerability monitoring standard. The big changes in this is that it is designed to more mimic a high security private sector security program and their way of approaching things. There are some really key significant differences. Mostly that includes focusing on real context for your vulnerabilities. Just because something is a low CVSS score does not mean it cannot lead to something really bad. You need to focus on those. And just because something is high doesn't necessarily mean that it can. So like we want to get away from just scoring and be paying a lot of attention to context. It also signals a bit of a shift for cloud service providers that is very explicit, which is that you must improve your security program. You must re-architect your systems, you must rebuild the way that you do things, and you must design better security systems in order to participate in a modern IT world. There's there is no longer time to wait for 30 days to fix things or 120 days. Like this is just not a thing that is going to be allowed. So as we move forward, we're going to see a more push for that. And it's important that folks understand that we are signaling this shift and it will take time. That's why it's an RFC and then a bunch of processes from that we're going to talk about. But I really want folks to understand that it's not like a do this tomorrow situation, but it is a signal that we expect cloud service providers to follow real modern architecture and real modern security practices. And that means designing systems where they can deal with vulnerabilities via mitigation, et cetera, in hours rather than in months. Like it is just the necessity. So I'm going to hand it back to Paul, I think, to talk a little bit how we're going to do that as part of this group and what that timeline will look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, I don't know. I thought we had oh yeah, okay. We are open for public comment until the 21st. This is a big change for the Rev5 community, right? When it comes to in the way of how we do processes now. So I know there is a lot of comments to be had. As of right now, we only have about 8. I know there's traditionally a rush the last day or two to get them in, but I would ask, if you've got comments or you want your voice to be heard, please, we do go through every single comment submitted publicly as we kind of go through the refinement process. And if you want it, last week we did hold a little bit more in-depth session around the continuous vulnerability monitoring with a bunch of different cloud service providers and industry. It is on, that recording is on our YouTube page. If you just type in FedRAMP in YouTube, you can easily find it. It is literally the last video that was posted, but Pete also just dropped the link as well. It gives a little bit more insight, not just from FedRAMP's perspective of kind of why we're doing what we're doing, but also how the CSPs are planning to react to it. Like I talked about earlier, with all of our standards, we will do a kind of a crawl, walk, run methodology when it comes to implementation. We will start, once we get through kind of the closed public comments, we will make an update to the standard. It will, if need be followed with technical assistance, and those will end up getting posted. Those updates will get posted to GitHub, not necessarily the RFC portal, but we'll make sure that you're tracking that. And right now, our target is a 3-month closed beta in September, right, followed by a 3-month closed or a 3-month open beta in January. Followed by full implementation in April of 26. Clearly, we know this process has a lot bigger impact than the SCN, which is why you'll see a little bit difference in the timelines. And please I know we've talked about this a few times, but if you look at the roadmap on GitHub for FedRAMP, you will notice for a lot of our standards, there are different implementation dates when you're dealing with 20x and Rev5, right? And it is in the naming conventions, it's spelled out pretty obviously, right? If it's got a 20x before it, it's a 20x timeline. If it's got Rev5 or R5, it's a Rev5 one. So please, if you are looking at the timelines on there, please don't email me freaking out. I promise you, they're just different timelines. And as we get closer to September and releasing it, once again, we'll go through the same process of, hey, here are the requirements in order to participate in the closed beta. Here are the requirements to participate in the open beta, and we'll work through those as we did with significant change notification. And with that said, I will pass it off to our glorious FedRAMP Technical Advisory Group.
Me first. So, hey everyone, we're going to bring our technical advisory group on. So, if you've paid attention to FedRAMP, especially M2415, you've probably heard of the tag. We talk about them a lot. They're super cool. They're this group that was created by by OMB in a memo that said basically FedRAMP needs to hang out with some technical people that actually know what's going on with FedRAMP instead of just having a bunch of program people doing whatever they want. So, we've been spending a lot of time focusing on that over the last year since we built up the tag. One of the things we wanted to do today, people always ask me, like, what's going on with the tag? Like, how does it work? What do they do? Sometimes people call the tag the board. Sometimes people call the FizCac the board, but no, we have a FedRAMP board. We have a FedRAMP technical advisory group, and we have a federal secure cloud advisory committee. It can be a little confusing. We got a few people that we get to hang out with and make decisions with. So the tag right now, we got a few folks that are really active members of our tag that have come from all across government. They help us like shape and tune all of these rules and requirements. They all have different backgrounds, etc. I'll say for the purposes of this conversation, just as a reminder, while everyone here is in official capacity, it's always helpful to just kind of remember that from a FedRAMP standpoint, people are quoting as a staff person, etc. So let's not go over attributing on specific quotes to different people's job titles, etc. This is members of the tag. All right. So to begin with, we're going to ask some questions, do some Q&A that I have planned in advance. And then as we get closer to the top of the hour, we'll hit some Q&A from the audience. So to begin with, we're going to be focusing on the RFC 12 that we just talked about. Before we dig into that, I'm going to go one by one. Could you please each briefly introduce yourself, explain your position and/or your subject matter expertise? And we'll go with Branko first.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Pete. Branko Bokan, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. I think by now everyone knows what CISA is. We are part of the Department of Homeland Security. In my current role, I run the Center of Excellence for Architecture and Engineering, but in my previous life, I was also managing the cyber directives, notorious binding operational and emergency directives that are issued by CISA. And what's really relevant to this subject matter is the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog and associated binding operational directive that we issued and I co-authored with several of my colleagues here at CISA.
And we appreciate that very much. Elizabeth, how about you?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Schweinsberg, and I'm currently a senior technical advisor at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which is part of the Health and Human Services Department. And I run the Zero Trust program here after actually working on the Zero Trust program at CMS as part of the US Digital Service. And I have a background in threat detection, incident response, digital forensics, doing a lot of corporate security, but also we dabbled in product security occasionally.
Yeah, Elizabeth was doing Zero Trust before. Most of us knew it was cool. Paul?
Hi, Paul Hirsch. I'm in the General Services Administration. We're recently part of cloud.gov. My team is the workshop team within cloud.gov, which I lead. So I'm not just an agency consumer of FedRAMP services. I'm also part of a FedRAMP CSP. It's my second time. I was part of Login as well. Yeah, jack of all trades, generally a builder, site reliability engineer, that sort of thing. Network engineering background too. So I can sling BGP semi-competently. But yeah, and help get a number of services FedRAMPed over the 5 years I've been at GSA.
So I think that does a good job of just showcasing kind of a few of there's a lot more people on our tag, but we only were able to get a couple of them here or 3 of them here today. All right, so for the next few rounds of questions, let's do this. If you want to answer one of these, we'll do raise hand so that you can kind of chip in and we'll go in order and we'll let you guys just kind of self-manage to some degree. Now I'm going to start with something spicy, I think. We're going to find out. So all of you saw a first draft of the continuous vulnerability management standard before it was released as RFC 12. And we talked about it and we went through some feedback and it changed a bit. But like, what was your initial reaction when you saw that draft? And can you tell us a bit about how that kind of changed over the process of discussion, hearing other perspectives, as well as seeing the draft rule change? Like, what's that like when a draft thing happens like that?
I'll go first. I don't know how to raise hand. I was looking for that. So my first reaction was, yes, we need this. Absolutely. And again, I did intentionally mention my work on finding operational directives, the work on the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. A lot of prior research and work went into it. A lot of understanding of issues and struggles federal agencies had with managing their vulnerabilities. Translating this into cloud environments was just yet another problem. So I was really excited that we were tackling this problem. A lot has changed. Even my opinion, I came feeling strongly about certain things, and we can talk about it later. But after being exposed to this very smart group of people on the tag team, I was convinced not once but many times that what I thought was right was wrong, and they managed to change my opinion. Exactly.
Yeah, Paul.
I found the raise hand button. It took me a minute. Generally very positive, and it got better from there. I particularly like the credibly exploited vulnerabilities, related to kind of reachability. It's just how you approach things in the real world. So work as done is there's this vulnerability. Could somebody pop us with it? Yes. Okay. We're not going to wait for whatever the time frame is based on the severity. We're going to fix that thing ASAP. So yeah, just really pragmatic. Appreciate it.
That's like the summary of this is just fix it. Okay, just fix it. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I liked the part where not all vulnerabilities are treated equally because there is a range and there's a big difference between something being vulnerable and maybe it crashes the system, but it doesn't actually give you access to any user data versus actually uh, causing a data breach. Um, uh, and it seems ambitious. It seems ambitious for like as an agency, like how am I going to be able to use this data efficiently? But as we started discussing it more, I'm like, oh yeah, like Branko keeps pointing out like ways that some of this is already covered in other things. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is different, but not different. And how do we make sure that they go together?
Yeah, I think like one of the things that's really fascinating for me, especially working with like Branko and CISA, is a reminder that M2415 requires FedRAMP to figure out a way to get all this data and funnel it over to CISA so that CISA can do something with it. And so there's a little bit of this fascinating, like people are like, what are agencies going to do with all of that? And I'm like, well, hopefully CISA is going to figure out something that they're going to do with all of this data because they're the ones that are supposed to ultimately get it. Braga, do you have something to add or are you just testing out the raised hands?
I did. So two things. I found the raise hand. Thank you, Paul. Now I know how to do it. I wanted to follow up on your comment, just fix it twice. Again, in my previous life, I was both on the side that was chasing vulnerabilities and side that was chasing people, chasing vulnerabilities. And one of the things, at least in the past, was people were willing to spend more time figuring out how to get out of fixing things instead of just fixing them and moving forward. And I think this is giving us the work that you are doing, and again, the tag is supporting, is giving us this opportunity to help people understand and teach them how to fix things quickly without wasting time on justifying why something cannot be done or should not be done.
And I hope that it also gives, people in the trenches that are making these decisions, like the clout and the backup they need to go to their supervisory chain and say, hey, we need resources, we need capabilities, we need this. But ultimately, fixing vulnerabilities isn't just about response, right? It's about better architecture. It's about designing things more in advance. There was a discussion I saw happening in the GitHub repository today where someone sort of flagged, like what happens like if a kev is released in a software patch or something, then it takes a long time to discover it and fix it. And like, why is a kev getting released in a patch? That should never happen. That kev should be like, that bad infected thing should be detected way before anything is deployed. So that's how you fix it, not by scanning and then fixing the things that you found. Okay, next question. What's your favorite part of this draft standard, or the part that you think will have the most impact on security? You're up, Elizabeth.
I win. My favorite part is the focus on providing mitigation options. And like it talks about partially mitigated and fully mitigated. Getting to full remediation can be hard and take a lot of time and resources. And we've got the long tail. And how do you make sure you find all of the HP ILO systems that are somewhere in the back dark corner of a data center and get those patched? But if we can put out the mitigations at the network firewall layer, at the application firewall layer, it both reduces our chance of vulnerability. Well, vulnerability is becoming an exploit, and gives us more visibility into what might actually be happening, what people are trying. That's my favorite part.
I get that all the time. People are like, how do I fix something if there isn't a patch? It's like, dude, that's the last thing you do to fix something. There are so many ways that you can mitigate something without a patch. Branko.
Narrowing down to what matters, narrowing down what the target of vulnerability management is. In the past, we wasted, and there are still organizations wasting a ton of time, again, chasing vulnerabilities that may have that high score, that have never been exploited, that will never be exploited, right? And they not just trying to remediate them, but also writing poems, writing justifications, everything else that goes with defending it with their IGs and everyone else. Focusing, narrowing down to what matters, what's doable, what really needs to be addressed is my favorite part.
Yeah, more time fixing things, less time arguing over what's in a spreadsheet. 100%. That's way too much of what we do right now, is arguing over the wording someone put in a spreadsheet about a description of a thing. Yeah. Paul.
Yeah, just fix it for the things that are credibly exploitable, and some leeway and support for being reasonable about things that are not credibly exploitable is really good balance. And teams at all levels need cover for this, because hard-nosed security people can always say, but what if, to any vulnerability, yeah, just being able to give them some ammunition and some agency to assess things, think about them in depth. So incredibly exploitable is my favorite, and also one where I'm interested to see how it develops, because it's not easy. Sometimes, like Log4j is just a great example where it's like, that's not at the edge. Well, it could be at the edge if you're using Log4j for logging on your load balancer. It might be impactful there, or it could be deep, deep within your system. So each of these, vulnerabilities, you've got to assess. You really need to know the context of your system well, and this, reinforces that. And you really need to know the context of your systems to secure them anyway. So this just is very pragmatic. I like it.
Yeah, I know we're all raised on like those cool Hollywood heist and hacker movies where like everything lines up perfect on the one day of the year that like the one thing happens, and then the person parachutes in, and then like the city power grid gets shut off, and then it's like they get access, and it's kind of like, okay, cool. You don't have to patch that vulnerability within 30 days because it's not going to happen until that once a year event. Like let's be realistic. Context. All right. So one of the things I love about the tag is that no matter what happens, there's always disagreement, even if it's not like malintent. It's not like I really think you're wrong, but it's like I think we could do this differently. I'd like to see this. I'd like to see a different perspective, etc. So I'm curious, like as this moves forward, is there something that's in there right now that you think is squishy? Maybe you'd like to see a change. Maybe you don't think it should be in that way, but like you think, wait and see how the feedback goes. Anything you want to see different? Branko, start us off.
Yes, let's start to disagree. I was already worried about how this panel was going. We were all in agreement, and no disagreement yet. But so one of the things, and again, we go back and forth. It doesn't mean that I'm right or anyone else on the tag is wrong. It's just one of those things that I currently don't agree. Is I think in the effort to narrow down vulnerability, we need to look at what's being exploited, what's known to be exploited. Obviously, a nod to CISA's catalog of known exploited vulnerabilities, and then everything else. Trying to fraction this into credibly exploited or possibly exploited, while philosophically may make sense, and we can discuss and talk about it, in practice, it makes things significantly more complex, and I think that it will be much easier if we were to narrow it down to what's known to be exploited and everything else.
Yeah, I mean that kind of in some ways it just boils down to like if you can just give a formula and somebody can just plug in the formula, then everything's easier and it's better and it just makes more sense. But it's so hard to do that. And then like from the FedRAMP side, and from the CISA side too, that every time you do that, somebody's like, well, I've got this weird bespoke reason why that formula won't work for me. And next thing you know, you got an 800-page document that started as like just fix it, and now it's eight. So like, I'm really curious to see how it's going to work out and how we can make that play, and where we need to push more, especially over time. Like I love the fact that we get to change, tweak, improve. I mean, this is a signal, right? Paul, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of subjectivity built into this, and there has to be, and there's a lot of nuance. So nothing I would change right now, but I'm interested really to see over time, like, are there too many different categories when it comes to response times? Are CSPs able to suss out what's, credibly exploitable or not? Are they just defaulting to mean, which is, patch it based on the severity? So I'm interested to see where the learning takes us. But yeah, nothing sticks out right now as a change it before this goes live.
Yeah, I know that's something that's on my mind also during all this. Like one of the weird things about working on policies and standards like this for FedRAMP is that you're not just reactive, you're not responding to the current issues, but you're trying to like how do we push this forward? How do we encourage an ecosystem where there is a different approach to this, where there are tools available that can help people do this? And then we have to be really aware that if we ask people to do something that requires something new to be built, and then that new thing isn't built, it's gonna fail. Right. So we have to be really careful about how we're doing this to make sure that we don't just end up in a land of ambiguity. Absolutely right. Elizabeth.
Yeah. Um, I'm not sure it's something that I actually disagree with. I might be too agreeable on this subject. Too soon to say. But what I'm really interested in watching play out is some of the tension between like the timelines we're suggesting for FedRAMP versus the bots that are already out there from CISA. And one might be stricter, one might be a little bit longer. And when we're comparing industry to government and like our timescales to be able to fix stuff is a little hard. And um can we expect faster from organizations that don't have some of the inherent bureaucracy that we have to make sure that we're all doing the same thing and doing the right thing? So I don't know. Curious how it'll play out over the course of these.
Yeah, I'm really excited, and like I think it's interesting. Like Kev's, I think like Kev's like 2201, right? If I recall correctly, like I think that's a great example because as we heard in our vulnerability management special event last week, like that's one that is relatively simple. There's tons of tools out there. The capability is built in, people that really take things seriously, they just handle kevs. And so like for them, the idea of doing kevs quicker than 2 weeks makes sense, right? They're like, it's an incident, fix it. So that's the example of where can we take something like that, that when it came out, it was very aggressive. A lot of people were like, how in the world will we ever patch things like this fast? And now a lot of tech companies are like, of course we patch things that fast. Branko?
I hope you don't mind me chiming in and following up. And I will not follow up, and I will not comment on Elizabeth's idea of fixing things faster than they're mandated. I don't think anyone will have any issues with that. I really wanted to follow up on what both you and Paul said about complexities, and I would like for someone to correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard this before, and I keep using this quote that federal enterprise is the biggest enterprise in the world. I don't know if that's correct or not, but I'm pretty sure that everyone will agree it's the most diverse enterprise in the world, right? And now we all know how that, people come from much smaller organizations, smaller enterprises. They say, well, how come you can't fix it? Because we've figured this out a long time ago. Well, we can, because we are big and we are diversified and everything. And now we are even expanding into second and third and fourth biggest enterprise in the world. Not only what was on that traditional federal enterprise, we're now expanding into other large organizations. Complexities are multiplying. Our job is not easy. And I just want everyone to recognize that and echo what you both mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought that was like, to me, when I started in tech, I came into U.S. Digital Service in 2019, and I got provisioned a laptop at Department of Homeland Security headquarters, and then a badge and everything like that. And then I went over to FEMA, and they were like, oh, you can't use your headquarters badge here, and you're going to need a new laptop and a new badge from FEMA. And I'm like, but it's in the Department of Homeland Security. And I couldn't even look up people's email addresses. I literally had to ask someone with FEMA access at the time to be like, what's this person's email? So like federal enterprise is the biggest enterprise, but that's like basically saying the tech sector is an enterprise, right? You got Meta, Google, Amazon, OpenAI, they're all doing things their own way. If you try to make them all report up and manage things in the same way, it kind of doesn't work. And it's sort of what it's like when you put a bot out. It's just like all these different companies just like responding to regulations, right? Treasury's like, no, we're not going to follow that bot because of this reason. It's just like the way that companies complain when we change something with FedRAMP or any other rule. I love it. Okay, we're gonna start doing Q&As from the audience. So if you have a question, throw it in there. As we start to stack that up a bit, one of the things I'm gonna ask is like, for the three of you, you're all technologists in government. There's a lot of folks with from industry here. We've talked a bit about government and something like the tweaks and things that make it different. Like, what is something that you wish industry folks knew about, like either knew better or knew more about, like as far as what it's like to do tech in government? Like, what is something you want to share? Paul?
We don't like all these rules either sometimes, and it's really hard to navigate. So we took an oath, we came here to serve a mission, and we spend the first few years of our federal time learning how to deliver in this very complicated space. Um, so for CSPs, like if there are ways you can remove complexity from a situation, excuse me, or help us meet our requirements, yes, think about that. If you approach compliance from the perspective of just checking off boxes, that will not save any time on the agency level, and we'll all be stuck in that spot forever. So, yeah, just know that we're just because things are working a certain way and it's frustrating doesn't mean that we like it that way. We came here to make things better and more efficient, and we won't stop trying to make that happen. So.
That's real. Like the number of times that, we had a conversation that started as like, well, we can't change this too much, and then ended with, Paul, Rock, or Elizabeth be like, no, we really need to change this. It's a big problem, Pete. And then we end up, all right, let's change it. We're going to do it. Branko?
I'll continue on that path of complexities. Again, not only being this big, whether biggest or not, but being so complex. Again, what other organization in the world can say that they operate a space station, international space station, and nuclear power plants, and print money and provide health services at the same time? But also one thing that people don't realize, federal enterprise is not one enterprise. It is so decentralized, both in terms of technologies, but in terms of management and funding and everything else. So organizing that federal enterprise to operate in sync is very difficult task.
Yeah, I mean, they're turning off our Zoom licenses, and I'm like, how do I meet with other agencies now? Because most other agencies have Google Meet, which is our official platform, blocked. This is crazy. Elizabeth.
You just need to make more efficient meetings so you can get them done in 40 minutes. And you're like, oh, sorry, meeting's over, we're out of time. Uh, when I prepared my statement for this question, I also went with the complexity, because every department and maybe even every agency within that department is different. How we design our architectures, what we use for enterprise stuff, how are we tracking our governance? Ideally, within a department, all the agencies use something that works together for tracking governance, so we don't have to like email spreadsheets around, but you never know. And where was I going with this? Yeah, so like sometimes I'm in HHS. We have like 4 big agencies, CDC, NIH, FDA, CMS. They're huge, a lot of people. My organization has over 230 FISMA systems. Yeah, and that runs the gamut from SaaS products that we don't have to do a lot with to some seriously bespoke software. Medicare turns 60 this month. Some of the code is that old, and it's just such a range. But then you have like the tiny agencies like Administration for Children and Families. They don't have the technical staff to like build out these complicated problems, so they inherit from HHS. And I think where I'm going with this is there's no one size fits all, and sometimes be patient with us. But we're trying, and most of us are here because we love it. Otherwise, well, we might have done something different.
Yeah, I mean, there's just, it's a constant sort of thing in the FedRAMP world, where especially folks from industry, if I sold this to HHS at CMS, then why is CISA looking at it again? Why can't they just use it? And it's that entire, like, it's not just difference in mission, but it's context. It's what systems will be connected to it, how it will work, what they're going to use it for. It's super different. So we always are going to see some level of that. There's a couple questions in the chat about the complexity of scaling out these types of new assessments and vulnerability programs. I want to kind of talk about that from the context of government as well, where like we see that across government, right? And Branko, when CISA puts out a BOD, like you don't expect that every single IT shop in the government in 3 weeks is going to flip a switch and do the thing, right? It's a signal that starts a change, and you hold people accountable, you give them authority, you support them. But they're like, even now, there are websites that get deployed without HTTPS, even though that BOD was like 10 years ago, and things like that. And like there's some level of, just because the rule says you have to do it this way, doesn't mean that the actual expectation is that you do it exactly that way, but rather that you demonstrate the intent behind it, which is improving your security and moving forward. I'm wondering if any of you have any just general thoughts about how you would start shifting your own, Paul, you've got systems. Elizabeth, you're working with systems. Like if you got FedRAMP on those systems, these rules affect you too. So how are you going to go about making sure that you're prepared for more aggressive remediation and context-based analysis? Paul?
Automation, and systems that are easy to change, and yeah, continuous flow of change instead of thinking about big chunks of change. That's the only way to cope with this. So move faster in smaller increments. Um, and that model, I mean, like I will say government, very complicated, not a single enterprise. And there's a lot of resilience that comes out of that as well. So like you can squeeze all the resilience out of a system by getting too efficient. And yeah, so that stuff's in tension, and that kind of works at every layer. Um, so yeah, but yeah, for us, if it's internet facing, you got to be able to patch it and roll it forward quickly. Otherwise, it's just you're not going to be able to make it.
No doubt. Branko?
I agree. Automation, prioritization also helps, but also removing noise. Um, Out of thousands of vulnerabilities that any organization have, yes, there will always be a few dozen that cannot be remediated immediately for whatever reason, that need more resources, more attention, more time. But there will also be thousands of them that could have been remediated yesterday, and we are still sitting on them because of those two that we can't remediate, and we're focusing on them. So start eliminating noise, so that will also give you more time and resources to work on what matters.
Yeah, that is a great point. Elizabeth, I hope you're going to say something about zero trust and how if you limit the exposure, you make it easier to handle vulnerabilities, or you can say whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to go with knowledge management first because, right, like how do we make sure that the information about what needs to be patched is getting efficiently um, from the company, the CSPs, to the people who can actually do the work? And how do we break down some of those barriers to make sure that uh, that they don't have to go through too many layers? We're not playing telephone or anything like that. And then the other place I was going was, well, with SaaS stuff, there shouldn't have to do a lot internally. Like you should do the stuff. So then it's thinking about for your platform as a service, for your infrastructure as a service, how can you keep how can you narrow down the build times, doing more CI/CD so that redeploying isn't hard, uh and then you don't have to worry about it as much. And there will always be the long tail um uh of stuff that is harder, but yeah, make the easy stuff easier.
Yeah, I think this like reuse is a basic technology factor now. It's a basic security factor too, right? Like I know we were talking about SharePoint recently because on-prem SharePoint was the whole thing. Well, it's like even though that vulnerability might have affected a cloud-hosted version, it was a lot easier for all the cloud-hosted versions in the world to be patched. Whereas everybody running their own bespoke artisanal SharePoint had to deal with it. And it's the same thing with operating systems. It's the same thing with containers. It's the same thing with like your own packages. Like the more that you roll your own, the more you are adding burden to yourself rather than relying on something that is more likely to just be handled globally. Paul?
Yeah, I think not just automation, but yeah, bring that information, shifting it left in a real way. Shifting left doesn't mean having meetings with more people earlier. It means putting the information in the hands of the practitioners where they're working. And yeah, there are ways to do that. Reducing the amount of hazards in the environment through smart architecture, using SaaS, all sorts of different techniques. Yeah, there's just a lot of ways, and then configuration, which comes up a lot. And this is for CSPs or any software providers. Um, if you have a really long list of things you need to do, like for your STIG or for your CIS benchmark, why aren't those the defaults? And I'm not talking about FIPS 140. I'm talking about like the big button that says anonymous logins or not. Why would anyone need that? Why is that default? So yeah, there's an interplay between a lot of these factors.
Branko?
Again, in line with that comment on that I made previously, and again, just shout out to our vendor community and plug for CISA efforts, secure by design. That whole idea of reducing noise, secure by design. We will never be able to remove all vulnerabilities from our environment. There will always be a need for vulnerability management, but do we really need to have this many vulnerabilities? A lot of them can be prevented by smarter design, and that's something that CISA is also working on. And again, I just want to share that message with the greater vendor community.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that is kind of interesting, like looking at some of the conversations in the chat and sort of going back to like where FedRAMP is at right now. And I think there's this consistent narrative that comes up, and it came up in our conversations as well about this, which is a reminder that the M2415, the policy memo that drives FedRAMP across government and drives for the adoption of cloud services, very explicitly outlines a world where the value that the government derives from commercial cloud services is the technology, expertise, techniques, capabilities, et cetera, that those cloud services bring. And that was a huge shift at the time. And now that we're starting to see that play out, I think it's causing a lot of confusion. And I'm even seeing this working with some of the hyperscale providers. They're like, just tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. And it's like, no, we literally, like, OMB policy says, like, you should tell me what we should do and we'll work together to determine how you can do that securely and how the government can assess that. And so it's been really interesting watching this change. And this is one of those things where we talk about things like risk and impact, and the government's risk for how it handles its own systems, its way of going about that should be very different from a commercial company that we are paying to, subscribe to, that is part of a commercial landscape, just running things for a bunch of businesses. We need to be thinking about that not as something they are creating for the government, but rather this commercial product that the government is choosing to use carefully in a specific way, in a way that is safe, et cetera. Elizabeth, something to add?
Yeah, on the shift left, there are entire classes of vulnerabilities that we can remove or make smaller just by being more careful in how we code. Um, if you're still using stir copy in your C and C++, then maybe, I don't like to victim blame, but we should have a talk. Stir and copy all the way. And there are tools out there to help us like prevent these from getting out. You have to make sure all of your software is going through it, which can be hard. One of the big internet companies I went to had something already built in, and they were still paying out bug bounties for SQL injection. And they had something looking for SQL injection, but if that code isn't going through the place, that makes it hard. So think early and often about how you can write better code, use type safe languages, and memory management should only be done by professionals.
Right? I think that brings us like home really well, where when you think about historically the way that FedRAMP was designed in the original 2011 memo genuinely was as a compliance program. It was like set bars, and as long as people get over those bars, they're fine. And then under M2415 and the FedRAMP Authorization Act before it, the direction was to shift FedRAMP into more of a security program. It is less about bars. It's less about, as long as you meet this arbitrary number, that is sufficient. But rather, it's to constantly push towards the max, to just push towards improved security, better delivery, better capability, and then just measuring of all of it. Because the thing we talked about earlier about different use cases mattering, like that is a positive for a lot of systems. If you don't want to run a cloud service provider that patches systems, you want to have a bunch of vulnerabilities out there and have sloppy infrastructure and all of that, maybe we just give you a bronze FedRAMP score, put you in a marketplace, and some agency can decide, yeah, I don't care. I'm using this for like the local farmers market. I don't really care if somebody's, squashes get hacked, and I'm not supposed to do I'm not supposed to do analogies because I always go off the deep end. But like, I think that there is a real value in thinking about FedRAMP as measuring your actual security posture while encouraging folks to improve that posture rather than creating just a simple binary, is it good enough, yes or no? Because that's not where any of us want to be. We want folks to compete, and to some degree, the efficiency and effectiveness of how you handle security can be a competition factor. And if it's cheaper but less secure, and there's a use case for it, maybe we use it. Who knows? That's the crazy world that we're in. So FedRAMP RFC 12 closes August 21. There is both a GitHub discussion forum for casual Q&A and questions and things like that with the public, with FedRAMP, etc. We can participate in that. Or you can post formal public comments. We can't respond to or participate with formal public comments. So if you make a public comment that has a question in it, that question is going to be factored into how we review those comments, but we're not going to be able to give you an answer. Same thing, there's also some public Google forms, and agencies can reach out to me, pete@fedramp.gov, with feedback on these RFCs. Hope you all had fun today. Hope you learned a bit. I'm so excited. Thank you, Tag, for being here. See you all soon. Cheers.
Thank you all.